My brother has never been good at letting me have the spotlight. If I got an A, he'd remind everyone about his A+. If I hosted a party, he'd somehow turn it into a tribute to himself. So when I invited friends over for my birthday this year, I was already bracing for whatever accidental chaos he'd bring. It wasn't just any birthday. 26 isn't exactly a milestone, but I'd been working my butt off at my new marketing job and finally had the budget to throw something nice. An actual catered dinner in my apartment, decent wine, and more than just chips and salsa. I'd even cleaned my place enough that no one could accuse me of living like a college student. Ethan, my older brother by 2 years, was on the guest list mostly out of obligation. Mom guilted me into it, and I figured if I didn't invite him, he'd show up anyway with some loud, self-deprecating speech about being excluded. He's the kind of guy who can walk into a room and own it, but also the kind who can accidentally set a tablecloth on fire trying to light a candle. The week before, he called to check in, which for him meant fishing for details he could use later. So, casual hangout or like a big production? I told him it was just dinner, low-key. He laughed in a way that made me immediately suspicious. Ethan never leaves things low-key. The morning of my birthday, I woke up to a group text from him. Can't wait for tonight. Everyone's gonna love the surprise. My stomach dropped. I didn't know what he had planned, but I knew it wasn't part of my plan. I spent the rest of the day trying to focus on final touches, arranging flowers, double-checking the wine glasses, making sure the playlist didn't have anything embarrassing. But his text kept nagging at me, and when the doorbell rang an hour early, I had a feeling the surprise had already arrived. I opened the door expecting Ethan with some ridiculous party prop, but instead, a delivery guy stood there holding 3 giant boxes. They were labeled "Fragile" and "Do Not Tilt" in bright red letters. I signed for them, still half in disbelief, and asked who they were from. He just pointed to the label, Ethan's name in all caps, and left. Dragging the boxes inside felt like moving furniture. Each one was sealed with enough tape to survive an earthquake. I grabbed scissors, sliced the first open, and froze. Inside was a massive inflatable archway, bright yellow with "Happy 50th" written across the top in silver letters. I stared at it, wondering if this was supposed to be a joke or if he had genuinely gotten the wrong thing. The second box was filled with plastic flamingos, dozens of them, each with a little stake for sticking into the ground. My apartment doesn't even have a yard. The third box? A life-size cardboard cutout of Ethan himself, wearing a tuxedo and holding a martini glass. I called him immediately. "What the hell is this?" I asked. He sounded thrilled. "Atmosphere," he said. "Parties need a vibe. You're welcome." I reminded him it was supposed to be a classy dinner, not a retirement luau for someone twice my age. He told me to trust the process, and hung up. By the time my friends started arriving, the archway was blocking my hallway, the flamingos were leaning against the couch, and the cutout of Ethan was standing in my kitchen like it was waiting for a drink. I tried to play it off as ironic decor, but I could feel the eye rolls. Then, about 20 minutes into the dinner, the power went out. Not just in my apartment, through the whole building. The fancy catered meal? Completely dependent on my now useless oven. And that's when Ethan, of course, decided to make his grand entrance. The door burst open, and there he was, holding a giant battery-powered speaker on one shoulder like he was about to DJ a music festival. Behind him, 2 of his friends carried coolers, a portable grill, and what looked like a suspiciously large supply of tiki torches. "Looks like you need a plan B," he announced, way too loudly for the candlelit room. People actually laughed, some out of relief, others because they knew Ethan always thrived in chaos. Before I could even protest, his friends were setting up the grill on my balcony, unloading burger patties and skewers like they were catering a block party. I was irritated, but the alternative was cold, half-cooked salmon and guests quietly making excuses to leave. So I let him take over. Within minutes, the smell of grilled food was filling the apartment. Someone hooked their phone to Ethan's speaker, and upbeat music replaced the awkward quiet. He even put the flamingos to use, lined them up across the balcony railing, creating what he called a tropical escape in the heart of Seattle. the inflatable arch got moved to my living room, and suddenly people were taking photos under it like it was part of the plan all along. I kept telling myself this wasn't a win for him, it was a salvage job for me. But as the night went on, I had to admit he was working hard to keep everyone entertained. He made drinks, told stories, and somehow convinced my very reserved coworker to lead a conga line. By the time dessert came out, roasted marshmallows from the grill, the evening felt nothing like the dinner I'd imagined, but it wasn't a disaster either. I caught Ethan watching me from across the room, smirking like he'd known this would happen all along. And maybe, annoyingly, he had. Around 10, most people were still hanging out, which was unusual for my gatherings. Normally by then, half the guests would have left to catch the last bus or get an early start tomorrow. But tonight, people lingered, talking, laughing, still picking at the food. Ethan had basically set up camp in my kitchen, mixing cocktails like he owned the place. He'd even learned a couple of tricks, flipping the shaker, spinning bottles in the air, which he was way too pleased about. I caught myself laughing at one of his ridiculous jokes, then quickly looked away before he noticed. When I ducked into the hallway for a moment, I overheard two of my friends talking. "I didn't think you and your brother got along," one said. The other replied, "Well, they seem like a good team tonight." It made me pause. Team wasn't a word I'd ever used for us. We were more like dueling solo acts. At one point, the power flickered back on. I figured that would be the signal for people to wrap things up, but Ethan lowered the music just enough to say, "No, leave it off. We've got something better going here." And somehow, everyone agreed. When the last guest finally left close to midnight, my apartment looked like a cross between a tailgate and a wedding reception in the wrong year. The flamingos, the arch, the leftover skewers, it was chaos. But it was also the most fun I'd seen my friends have in a long time. Ethan started gathering trash into a bag without me even asking. "Guess this was more your style after all," he said casually. I didn't answer, but I did hand him a beer. For once, the silence between us didn't feel competitive. It felt almost easy. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and the faint sizzle of something on the stove. For a second, I thought I dreamed it, but no, Ethan was in my kitchen, wearing one of my aprons like he was running a brunch pop-up. "Don't get used to this," he said when he saw me, sliding a plate of scrambled eggs toward me. "Just figured you'd be too wiped out to cook." He wasn't wrong. My body felt like it had hosted a 3-day festival instead of a one-night party. We sat at the table, the quiet almost startling after last night's noise. I was about to thank him when he smirked and said, "You know, if you just admit I saved your birthday, we can skip the awkward part." I rolled my eyes, but didn't argue. The truth was, without him, it would have ended in cold salmon and polite early exits. While we ate, he told me he'd heard about the outage from a friend in my neighborhood and decided to upgrade his prank supplies into a rescue plan. "See? The flamingos were destiny," he said. I tried to picture the night without them and, annoyingly, realized it wouldn't have been half as fun. After breakfast, we tackled the cleanup together. He worked faster than I expected, not complaining once, even when he had to deflate the giant arch. At one point, he found a leftover marshmallow stuck to the side of my couch and just laughed, tossing it in the trash without making a comment about my furniture. By the time he left, my apartment looked normal again. Well, almost. One flamingo was still standing on the balcony. I didn't have the heart to move it. Over the next week, I kept hearing about the party from people who'd been there. My boss stopped by my desk to say it sounded like quite the event, which made me cringe a little, but he was smiling, so I guessed it was a compliment. Friends were tagging me in photos under the ridiculous archway, or posing with Ethan's cardboard cutout like it was some kind of celebrity meet and greet. Even my quiet neighbor from down the hall, who never talks to anyone, caught me in the lobby one morning and said, "Heard the music from my place. Sounded fun." For someone who once filed a noise complaint about a dripping faucet, that was basically a rave review. Ethan, of course, basked in the attention. He started sending me links to party supply websites, just in case I wanted to plan another gathering. When I told him it was a one-time thing, he replied, "We'll see." You've got a reputation to uphold now." As much as I hated to admit it, I felt a little different about him after that night. We still bickered when we saw each other. Some habits die hard, but I couldn't shake the image of him on the balcony, flipping burgers like it was his mission to save the night. It wasn't something I'd asked for, but maybe that made it better. One evening, while scrolling through the photos again, I caught myself smiling at one where we were both in the frame, me holding a marshmallow stick, him mid-laugh. We looked like siblings who actually liked each other. That was new. And then my phone buzzed with a text from him. "Thinking of throwing a little something at my place this weekend. You in?" I had a feeling this wasn't going to be a quiet game night. I almost said no out of reflex. Ethan's little somethings usually spiraled into noise complaints or at least one piece of broken furniture. But before I could type my excuse, another message popped up. "Nothing crazy. Promise. Just a few people." Against my better judgment, I said yes. Part of me was curious. Maybe he really had toned it down. Or maybe I wanted to see if that weird teamwork vibe for my birthday was a fluke. When I showed up Saturday night, his apartment was surprisingly calm. There were candles on the coffee table, soft music playing, and maybe 10 people scattered around chatting. For a second, I wondered if I'd walked into the wrong place. Ethan handed me a drink and grinned. "See? I can do Loki." I was about to congratulate him when I noticed a huge covered tray on the kitchen counter. "What's that?" I asked. He just said, "Later," in that same suspicious tone he'd used before my party. The evening started off fine. Good food, no flamingos in sight. But about an hour in, Ethan clapped his hands and announced, "All right, everyone, time for the main event." He pulled the cover off the tray to reveal a mountain of cupcake decorating supplies. I almost laughed. It was actually harmless. People got into it fast. Frosting, sprinkles, a bit of friendly competition. I found myself paired with Ethan, which turned into us trying to sabotage each other's designs. It was ridiculous, but fun. Halfway through, I realized something. For once, he wasn't trying to outshine me. He was just in it with me. And maybe that was why, when he suggested we co-host something next month, I didn't immediately say no. Over the next few weeks, the idea of co-hosting turned into actual planning. We decided on a backyard barbecue at a mutual friend's place. Neutral territory, so neither of us felt like the other was taking over. I handled the food list and guest invites. Ethan took charge of atmosphere, which I made him define in writing this time. No surprise flamingos. No inflatable arches. He agreed, though he added a smiley face that didn't feel entirely reassuring. We met up a few times to prep, and to my surprise, it wasn't a battle. He listened when I said something wouldn't work, and I actually considered some of his ideas instead of shutting them down automatically. It felt efficient. Weird, but efficient. The day of the barbecue, I showed up early with trays of marinated chicken and vegetable skewers. Ethan was already there, stringing up lights in the yard. And here's the part I'll never admit to him. It looked really good. Warm, simple, inviting. Like something out of a magazine spreadabout. Effortless summer entertaining. Except I knew how much work had gone into it. Guests started arriving, and for once, we weren't tripping over each other trying to control the flow of the event. I manned the food table while he worked the grill, and people naturally moved between us. It felt like we'd accidentally stumbled into a system that worked. At one point, I caught him glancing over while I was laughing with a group of friends. He gave me this small nod, not smug, not teasing. Just a quick, quiet acknowledgement that we'd pulled this off together. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like we were on opposite teams. As the evening settled in, the lights Ethan had hung cast a soft glow over the yard. People were eating, talking, and for once, no one seemed in a rush to leave. I was at the drinks table refilling lemonade when one of our friends came up to me and said, "You two should do this more often. You work well together." It caught me off guard. I'd spent most of my life thinking of Ethan as someone I had to manage around, not alongside. But looking over at him, laughing with a guest while flipping burgers, I realized there was some truth to it. Maybe we weren't opposites so much as two very different puzzle pieces that happened to fit when we tried. When the food was gone and people started gathering around the fire pit, Ethan walked over and handed me a plate with the last perfectly grilled skewer. "Figured you earned it," he said. I almost made a sarcastic comment, but instead, I just took it. "Thanks," I said and meant it. Later, when the night was winding down, I found myself sitting next to him by the fire. We didn't talk much, just watched the embers and listened to the low hum of conversation. It wasn't the loud, chaotic energy that usually followed Ethan. It was calm, comfortable. Before I left, he said, "You know, you're not bad at this whole co-hosting thing." I smirked. "Don't get used to it." But as I walked to my car, I knew we'd probably end up doing it again. The funny thing was, somewhere between the flamingos, the cupcakes, and this barbecue, we'd stopped trying to one-up each other. And I wasn't sure if that made us better siblings, or just better at throwing parties. A week later, I got a text from Ethan that simply said, "So, Thanksgiving?" I stared at it for a minute, half expecting the follow-up to be a picture of a giant inflatable turkey. But nothing came, just that one question. Normally, the idea of planning a holiday with him would have made me groan, but this time, I didn't feel the same dread. I could already picture how it might go, him handling the cooking, me organizing the seating, us actually pulling off something our family would talk about for the right reasons. I typed back, "Only if we keep it simple." His reply came instantly. "Define simple." I laughed and sent, "No surprises." Another instant reply, "You're no fun." But I could almost hear the grin behind it. We ended up meeting a few days later to sketch out ideas. It wasn't a big, sentimental moment, no dramatic truce or heartfelt confessions, but it felt like we quietly shifted into a new phase. The rivalry was still there, sure, but it wasn't running the whole show anymore. Thanksgiving came, and it went well. Not perfect. He burned the rolls. I forgot the cranberry sauce. But no one left early, no one fought, and somehow everyone ended up taking pictures in front of a small string of lights he'd hung by the fireplace. When it was over and the dishes were done, Ethan handed me a plate of leftover pie and said, "See? We make a good team." I didn't argue. We still weren't the kind of siblings who'd hug it out or have long heart-to-hearts, but I knew we'd hit a new kind of balance. And maybe that was the best birthday gift he could have given me, without even knowing it.